My neighbour spent close to $300 last spring tearing out two raised beds and refilling them with bagged soil because nothing would grow. Same weekend, I took a bed that looked just as dead, dusted a powder across it that cost me $2, and watered it in. By July, my bed was loaded. His was still struggling. Here's the part that bothers me. This was never a secret. It was standard advice in government growing guides until the post-war fertilizer boom made it unprofitable to recommend. So it disappeared from the catalogues and the labels. I dug it back up and tested it. Stay with me, because the powder only works if you apply it in one specific season. Get the timing backwards and you'll actually make the bed worse. Let me back up and tell you who buried it, because this matters. After World War II, the country had an enormous problem. We had built dozens of plants to manufacture ammonium nitrate for munitions. When the war ended, that capacity didn't disappear. It got pointed at agriculture. Those same nitrate plants were converted to make synthetic fertilizer. And almost overnight, home gardening got reframed around one idea: we buy a bag of numbers, pour it on, walk away. NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That became the whole conversation. But go back a few years, before the boom, and look at what the government was actually telling people. I have a USDA Victory Garden pamphlet from 1943 sitting on my shelf. I found it digging through old extension material, and the very first step it lists for preparing a bed, before fertilizer, before anything, is correcting the acidity of your soil with lime. It was foundational. It was step one. Then within about a decade, it quietly fell off the product labels and out of the seed catalog instructions. Nobody banned it. It just stopped being printed because there was no money in printing it. And here is what that cost people. My neighbour spent close to $300 last spring tearing out two raised beds and refilling them with bagged soil, convinced his dirt was finished. It wasn't. Multiply that across millions of gardeners buying repeat bags of fertilizer season after season for beds that only ever needed a single $2 correction. That is the stakes. Years of money and effort spent feeding a problem that was never about food in the soil. Now, I don't take old advice on faith. I'm a science teacher. So I dug this method out of that 1943 pamphlet and I tested it in my own garden against a control with records. Let me walk you through what I found. The powder is garden lime. That's it. Ground limestone, calcium carbonate, and in the dolomitic version, magnesium carbonate as well. You can buy a small box at any hardware store for about $2, and that amount will treat a raised bed. It looks like white flour. You scoop it, you dust it across the surface, you water it in. There is nothing exotic about it. There is no proprietary blend, no patent, no brand you have to trust. It's crushed rock. And that, right there, is the first reason it vanished from the labels. You cannot build a recurring business around a bag of crushed limestone that a gardener buys once every few years. So it got pushed to the back shelf, while the colourful bags with the big numbers got the front of the store and the full-page catalogue spread. Now here is the part that surprised me when I first ran the numbers. That bed my neighbour tore out was not dead. There was nothing wrong with the soil itself. The problem was the pH. My mountain clay-derived beds, left alone, drift acidic. Mine had drifted down to about 5.4 on the metre. And here is the science. At a pH that low, the nutrients in your soil don't disappear, but they change their chemical form into compounds the plant roots simply cannot absorb. Phosphorus locks up. Calcium locks up. Iron, manganese, the micronutrients, all of it gets chemically bound into forms that are physically present in the dirt but completely unavailable to the plant. So you've got a bed full of food and a plant that's starving in the middle of it. You can pour more fertilizer on and most of it locks up the same way. The plant sits there, stunted, pale, refusing to fruit, and every instinct you have tells you to feed it more. What lime does is raise that pH back towards 6.5. Which is the range where those locked compounds release. You're not adding much new food. You're unlocking the food that was already there, plus you're directly supplying calcium and magnesium from the limestone itself. Let me explain the holding part, because this is where the chemistry teacher in me can't help himself. Soil has something called cation exchange capacity. What I mean by that is the clay and organic matter in your soil carry a slight negative electrical charge, and that charge holds onto nutrient particles the way a magnet holds a paperclip, so they don't just wash away in the rain. When the soil is too acidic, hydrogen crowds onto those holding sites and shoves the good nutrients off. Lime sweeps the hydrogen out and lets calcium, magnesium, and the rest take their proper place again. You're not just changing a number on a meter, you're restoring the soil's ability to hold and hand over food. A fertilizer label has no reason to tell you that. There's no profit in informing a customer that the nutrients they need are already sitting in their bed, held hostage by a pH problem a $2 box fixes. The label sells you the bag. It does not sell you the chemistry that would make the bag unnecessary. Now, I won't ask you to take my word for it because I didn't take the pamphlet's word for it. I ran the comparison. I have a 4x8 test bed next to my deck that I use for exactly this kind of side-by-side. I split it from soil that all started the same, acidic, drifted down low. On one half, I applied lime and brought it up towards 6.5. The other half I left alone as my control. Same seed, same water, same sun, same season. The only variable I changed was the pH. I ran that trial across 2 seasons to make sure it wasn't a fluke, and what I found was clear enough that I went back and underlined it in my notebook. By July, the limed half was loaded with fruit. The control half was stunted, smaller plants, fewer tomatoes, pale leaves. When I weighed it out, the limed side gave me roughly double the yield off the same footprint. And it wasn't just quantity. I ran the fruit across my Brix refractometer. That's the little handheld tool that measures sugar content. Higher Brix means the plant moved enough energy and minerals into the fruit to make it sweet. The limed side tomatoes read higher. Sweeter fruit, more of it, from soil that looked finished. There was one more thing in the records worth naming. The limed bed had almost no blossom end rot, while the control showed it on the bottoms of several fruits. That comes straight back to calcium. Calcium does not move freely through a plant the way nitrogen does. Once a leaf has it, it's stuck there. So the fruit has to pull in fresh calcium right at the moment it's setting. In acidic soil, the roots can't grab calcium fast enough. The bottom of the tomato goes black. And people blame everything except the pH. Get the calcium available, get the uptake working, and that whole problem quietly goes away. Now here is the part that even a lot of experienced gardeners never connect, and it's the reason this whole thing is a trap and not just an oversight. The synthetic fertilizers that replace lime, the ammonium-based ones especially, actively acidify your soil over time. The plant takes up the ammonium, and the chemistry of that exchange releases hydrogen into the root zone, and hydrogen is exactly what drives pH down. So the more bagged fertilizer you pour on a struggling bed, the more acidic that bed becomes, the more your nutrients lock up, and the deader it looks. Sit with that for a second. The product sold as the cure is one of the things making the bed worse. And the gardener watching the bed fail does the most natural thing in the world, reaches for another bag, more fertilizer, which drives the pH down further, which locks up more food. It is a self-reinforcing loop, and it runs exactly backwards from the fix. People are pouring money into the very thing deepening the problem, and they have no idea because the one cheap correction that breaks the loop got taken off the label 70 years ago. Now, before we keep going, I want to share something with you. If what I've been walking you through is making sense, if you're starting to see how much of yield is a soil chemistry problem and not a luck problem, then I want to point you to the full system. It is in my book, Steve's 30-Day Maximum Yield Protocol. The whole thing is $17 at stevesgardenbooks.com. Chapter 3 is the soil reset, and it lays out exactly this. There is a diagram showing nutrient availability by pH. You can see for yourself which nutrients lock up and where, plus the specific lime and sulfur application rates I use. If you're watching on your television, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. Take your time finding it. I will be right here. If you're on a phone or laptop, the link is in the description. All right, let us keep going because the why behind all this matters. Here is what happened. During the war, the country built enormous plants to make ammonium nitrate. That was munitions, explosives. When the war ended, those plants did not shut down. They were converted to make fertilizer, and suddenly there was a massive industry that needed customers, repeat customers. Now think about lime from that industry's point of view. Lime is the wrong product. It is cheap. It is a one-time correction. Apply it once and the bed stays fixed for years. You do not come back next spring for another bag. That is a terrible business model. But the synthetic fertilizers they were selling, the ammonium-based feeds, those acidify the soil over time. I explained the chemistry of that a moment ago. So the very product they were selling kept beds drifting acidic, kept yields underperforming, and kept gardeners coming back for more bags. That is a dependence loop, and it sells products season after season. So liming, which had been front page advice in those USDA bulletins, quietly fell off the labels and out of the catalogues. The marketing shifted to the NPK numbers on the bag. Now let me be honest with you, because I always want to be straight on this. Lime is not a miracle. It cannot replace nutrients to chichpunis that are genuinely gone from depleted soil. If the food is not there, raising the pH will not conjure it, and you can absolutely overdo it. Lime a bed that is already at neutral or dump on far too much, and you will tie things up the other direction and do harm. I'm not telling you fertilizer is useless. Sometimes you do need to feed. But here is the cost that bothers me. A gardener can spend years and easily hundreds of dollars feeding a bed that only ever needed a $2 pH correction. They never know it because the one product that breaks the loop stopped being recommended 70 years ago. My neighbor spent close to $300 hauling out soil that was never dead. That is the personal price of a buried instruction. Now, stay with me, because here is the part that the hook warned you about: the timing. The powder only works if you apply it in one specific season, and that season is fall, after your final harvest. For me, here in the foothills, that is late October. And the reason is the chemistry of how lime reacts. Lime is slow. It needs soil moisture and roughly 2 to 6 months to neutralize the acid and actually shift the pH. So a fall application uses the whole winter to do its work, and by spring, planting the bed is corrected and ready. Get the timing backwards and you make the bed worse. Here is why. If you apply in spring, right before you plant, that lime has not reacted yet. You have got unreacted granules sitting in the root zone, and each one creates a little pocket of very high pH right around it. And in those high pH pockets, phosphorus, iron, and manganese tie right up, exactly the opposite of what you wanted. You induce a deficiency in the crop you just planted. The fix becomes the problem, and your new transplants sit there stunted. That is the failure mode, and I learned to respect it. Now here is my refinement, the thing I do that most folks never think to. I do not dig the lime in deep. I dust it across the surface and water it in. Let the winter rains and snowmelt carry it down naturally. About 5 pounds per 100 square feet. And then before I plant a single transplant in spring, I check it with my pH meter, the one I calibrate every week. I confirm the bed actually landed near 6.5. The plant does not lie and the meter does not lie. I do not guess. All right, before I let you go, everything I just showed you rested on one thing: a measured before and after in my test bed. The limed bed against the control on the record. That is the only reason I trust it. And that is exactly what Chapter 2 of the book teaches: the measurement foundation. It walks you through the record-keeping system I've used for 22 years with the template diagrams and the measurement points so you can baseline your own beds and prove the lift yourself instead of guessing. Now you have the method they stopped printing. If you want the full system to measure it, it is at stevesgardenbooks.com. TV viewers, point your phone at the QR code on screen. Phone and laptop, folks, the link is in the description. Go ahead and pull that up now. No rush, I will give you a moment. So that is the whole thing. The bed that looked dead was never dead. It was acidic and locked up, and a $2 fall dusting of garden lime resurrects it by unlocking the food that was already sitting there. Now you know the foundational step that stopped getting printed on the labels, and you can stop replacing soil you never needed to replace. Your conditions might be different. Soil and pH vary from yard to yard, so test your own bed before you commit to it across the whole garden. Next time, I will show you another one of these: $2 of boric acid from the Pantry and 30 days of pest control with no spraying. All right, that's what I have for you today. I'll see you in the next one.